All right, guys, welcome back to American Traditions. My name is Mr. G, and today we are diving into British America. When we had left off, we had been talking about the Spanish, and they really had a 100-year head start on New World colonization. By the time England decides they're going to get into the game, the Spanish had basically set up control in what is now modern-day Mexico, Cuba, Peru, and even parts of Argentina and Uruguay. And so with this, England decides that they have to get serious. England, under Elizabeth I, sought to compete with Spain's wealth and power. Under Elizabeth, Spain had lost, Spain had lost a little bit of their navy. In fact, the Spanish Armada was crushed in 1559. And so this big event led to really a golden age for England. During Elizabeth I's reign, we saw the expansion of trade, exploration, as well as literary achievements. Remember, this is the time of Shakespeare, after all. And so England is heading out because they want to get a piece of that mercantilism action. Remember that mercantilism is this idea that colonies exist to serve the mother country, and so they need to stimulate trade by selling their manufactured and their finished goods, importing raw goods, and creating new markets to sell their own products. And so England is going to do that in North America. But it's not just the search for money or the search for power that motivates the English. We also see other factors coming into play as well. One thing that we have to realize is that the English go through a population boom. In 1500, they have less than 3 million people. But by the mid-17th century, there's over 5 million people in England. So that's quite a jump in about 50 years. That's almost doubling. And so with rising land costs, stagnating wages, increased poverty, and a growing number of landless people, there was pressure to open up the floodgates, as it were, and allow people to go start a new life in the New World, right? Merchants also sought a lot of wealth, and a new style of firm had just come into the mix. See, European merchants around this time discovered that if you sponsor a ship and you pay for everything and it sinks in the Atlantic, that's not really a good bet. However, if you divide that endeavor into smaller parts and you spread out the risk amongst other investors, then you can gain a piece of the profit while simultaneously minimizing your own risk. And so these joint stock companies did just that. It was an early form of modern-day corporations that were made to basically manage capital and risks. So the idea was, me and 10 of my wealthy friends are going to split the cost of sending a ship to the New World, and we'll split our profit 10 ways when it comes back. However, if we lose that ship for whatever reason, storm, starvation, disease, what have you, and rather than losing the whole cost of the ship, I've now only lost 1/10 of the ship. That also frees up the rest of my assets to invest in other trips. So even if 2 out of my 3 voyages are successful, I am still making money to offset the cost of my losses. And so this is where we see modern economics playing a big role in the development of trade and the formation of colonies. All right. One of the most conspicuous examples of a joint stock company is the East India Company that had a monopoly on tea and trade from, India to the New World. In fact, the East India Company was a large commercial outgrowth of mercantilism. Not to be outdone by the Spanish, the English also felt a higher calling when it came to coming to the Americas. There was a lot of support amongst the English to glorify God, England, and Protestantism, which had taken hold during Elizabethan times. You had religious advocates like Richard Hakluyt and John Dee, who used their historical and religious arguments to justify colonization. See, you have to understand that the English and the Spanish have been enemies for a long time. Not nearly as storied enemies as the English and the French, but there was still a lot of bad blood. Remember that just a couple years prior to this, the Spanish had sent their royal armada to go dethrone Queen Elizabeth I. And so, there was a little bit of bad blood because of that. And so the English perceived themselves as superior to the Spanish, who were associated with cruelty, in part due to works like De las Casas and others. And so the support for colonization had a very religious overtone and had a very mission-oriented overtone. The idea here was that the English would be bringing the true religion to the New World and would be treating the Native Americans with grace. As we'll see, it's a lot easier to say it than to practice it. And so this led to the development of the Virginia colony. In 1607, Jamestown is founded on the James River. Now earlier we had talked about some of Britain's early attempts to try to settle in the Americas. We had talked about the Roanoke colony that went missing. And so this was the first successful colony here in what is now the United States. There were a lot of struggles. It's not to say that it was a cakewalk. Just because it was successful doesn't mean that it was like wonderful. There was disease, starvation, and conflict with the early Powhatan Nation nearby. Now, John Smith was just the guy to lead. Yes, John Smith is a real character. The Disney character makes him a lot less rugged, a lot less beardy. I'm a little partial to the beard myself. But John Smith's leadership was essential in getting the Jamestown colony off the ground. See, originally the Jamestown colony had sent more gentlemanly people to colonize. And so because of this, they were not prepared with a lot of the skills or skill sets necessary for survival. I don't know why you would send a banker to the New World when you really need carpenters and blacksmiths and other professions like that. But John Smith was able to whip them into shape. He had a very motivating principle. He said, "He that will not work shall not eat." Later on, John Rolfe would introduce tobacco, which became a huge economic driver. The Virginia colony was one of the biggest exporters of tobacco. So over time, the colony got off the ground, became successful, and even established local government. We see in 1619 the establishment of the House of Burgesses in Virginia, and it's also the introduction of African slavery into not only Virginia, but into the continental United States. Jamestown did not have it easy. Their expansion led to conflicts with the Powhatan Confederacy. And in 1622, shortly after establishing a local government there, we see Opechancanough surprise attack end up killing 350 colonists. This leads to war between the colonists and the Powhatan Confederacy and would forever change England's policy towards Native Americans. It shifted towards expulsion of Native Americans, kicking them off their lands, rather than trying to commingle and live side by side. This destruction of Native American groups and the pushing them off of their land in conjunction with the rise of tobacco as a cash crop led to increased colonization and expansion throughout colonial America. We also see the area of New England become settled. And so New England is a bit different. Whereas Virginia and many of the southern colonies were colonized for economic reasons, things like trade, things like cash crops. New England was founded on mostly religious goals. There were some economic colonies, but for the most part, New England had many different groups in a relatively small area compared to other colonies. So they did have an economy that was based on small farms, fishing, lumber, shipbuilding, and trade. New England's colonists did benefit, however, from being some of the later colonies due to the fact that Native American populations had been devastated by a smallpox epidemic. One of the primary drivers for colonization in New England was religion. And so this is where we see groups like the Puritans and later the Quakers and other groups come to dominate New England's politics, culture, and religion. The Puritans were one of the first groups to come over on the Mayflower. We might call them pilgrims, but these Puritans really sought to purify the Church of England and create a shining city on a hill, as John Winthrop said. And so the Puritans were Calvinists. They believed in predestination and simple worship. They differed greatly from the Church of England and their customs. And so Puritans migrated in family groups, establishing towns and small villages all across the region. The hope here was to create a new polity that was based on what they believed was the true religion, the best religious practices, and a culture of hard work and discipline. John Winthrop quotes the Bible in saying, "We shall be as a city upon the hill, and the eyes of all the people shall be upon us." Their goal was to be an example not just for the other colonies, but for all the nations of the world in terms of their religion, their piety, and their culture. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Thanks for tuning in. If you haven't hit that like button, go ahead and do that now. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't. If you haven't hit that bell to get notifications, go ahead and do that as well. I'm Mr. G, and I'll see you next time.